I turned 100 years old last spring, not in a hospital bed, not in a facility with nurses checking on me every hour, not in my daughter's spare bedroom with a baby monitor on the nightstand. I turned 100 years old in my own kitchen, standing at my own stove, cooking my own breakfast. And if you're over 60 right now and you're quietly terrified of what the next decade looks like, whether you'll still be driving yourself to the grocery store, whether you'll still be able to get up off the floor if you fall, whether your children will start having the conversation with you about assisted living, then I need you to stay with me today. Because what I'm going to share with you is not a magic trick. It's not a supplement. It's not something you have to buy. It's the truth about how I have lived and why my body at 100 years old still works the way it does. My name is Elena. I was born in 1924. I have outlived 2 husbands, one of my children, a world war, the invention of television, the invention of the internet, and frankly most of the doctors who told me over the years what I should and shouldn't be doing with my health. I have earned the right to speak plainly. So that is exactly what I'm going to do. I want to talk to you about 3 vegetables, not because they are some secret that nobody knows, but because I have watched people my age, brilliant, vital, wonderful people, slowly disappear into dependency and confusion and pain. And so many of them were eating the wrong things without ever knowing it, while ignoring the right things without ever understanding why they mattered. But before I get to the vegetables, I need to tell you something more important, something that took me decades to understand. Food is not just fuel. The way you choose to feed yourself is an act of faith. It is a statement about whether you believe your life still has value. It is a declaration that you are worth the effort of taking care of. And for those of us who are past 60, past 70, past 80, that faith, that quiet daily act of choosing yourself, is the foundation that everything else is built on. I'll come back to that, I promise. But first, let me tell you about my hands. When I was 76 years old, I started losing feeling in my fingertips. Not dramatically, not suddenly. It was gradual, the way most of the important things are. I would button a coat and not feel the button properly. I would pick up a glass and be unsure of my grip in a way that frightened me more than I let on to anyone. My doctor told me it was peripheral neuropathy. Age-related, he said. To be expected, he said. We can manage it, he said. As if managing it, living inside a slowly narrowing room, was the best I should hope for. I went home and I sat at my kitchen table and I thought about my Aunt Clara. Aunt Clara lived to 93. She sewed her own clothes until she was 89. Her hands were steady and sure and warm, and she never once mentioned her fingers giving her trouble. And I started thinking about what she ate because I had spent enough summers in her kitchen as a girl to know it by heart. She ate spinach almost every single day, grew it herself in 2 big pots on her back porch. She would wilt it in a pan with a little garlic, just a few minutes, and eat it alongside whatever else was on the table. She used to say, "Elena, the dark leaves are where the life is." I thought she was being poetic. She was being precise. Because here is what I eventually learned, and what changed everything for me. Chronic inflammation is the hidden engine behind almost every condition that steals independence from people as they age. The joint stiffness that makes it hard to open a jar, the arterial narrowing that raises your blood pressure and strains your heart, the cognitive fog that makes you feel like you're thinking through wet wool, the nerve damage that starts in your fingertips and works its way inward. Inflammation. quiet, invisible, relentless inflammation. And spinach, real spinach, properly prepared, is one of the most powerful natural anti-inflammatory foods that exists on this earth. Spinach is extraordinarily rich in folate, magnesium, vitamin K, and compounds that your nervous system relies on to maintain the pathways between your brain and your body. Your nerves are not static. They can regenerate, they can strengthen, but they need the right materials to do it, and spinach provides several of them in a form your body recognizes and uses efficiently. It also contains alpha-lipoic acid, an antioxidant that researchers have studied specifically in connection with nerve health and circulation in the extremities. After 4 months of eating spinach 5 or 6 times a week, wilted with garlic, raw in salads with lemon and good olive oil, stirred into eggs in the morning, I went back to my doctor. He tested the sensation in my hands. He tested my grip. He looked up from his clipboard with an expression I had never quite seen on his face before, which was bewilderment. He said the progression had stopped. He asked what I had changed. I said, I started listening to my Aunt Clara. I am now 100 years old. This morning I buttoned my own blouse, every button, without looking. If something in what I'm saying is resonating with you, if you have an Aunt Clara of your own, or a mother, or a grandmother whose kitchen wisdom you're only now beginning to understand, leave me a comment below. Tell me about them. I would genuinely love to hear it. And if you think someone you love needs to hear this today, please share it with them before you go. The second vegetable is broccoli. I know. You've heard about broccoli. Everyone's heard about broccoli. You're not impressed. Let me tell you why broccoli matters in a way that nobody ever explained to me until I was well into my 80s, and I wish someone had told me 50 years sooner. When I was 81 years old, I started having trouble sleeping. Not the ordinary sleeplessness of a busy mind. I've always been good at quieting my mind at night. This was different. I would wake at 2 or 3 in the morning with a stiffness across my shoulders and upper back that wasn't quite pain, but was something between discomfort and dread. A kind of bodily tension that wouldn't release. And I would lie there in the dark feeling older than I ever had, which at 81 was still not something I was willing to accept. My physician ordered a full blood panel. When the results came back, she pointed to my inflammation markers, specifically my C-reactive protein levels, which are one of the clearest measures of systemic inflammation in the body. They were elevated, not dangerously, but consistently. She explained what that meant over time. Increased risk of cardiovascular stress, accelerated joint deterioration, disrupted sleep architecture, and a gradual dimming of cognitive sharpness that she described in clinical language, but that I heard very simply as your brain getting slower. I asked her what I could do beyond medication. She mentioned several things. One of them lodged in my mind. She mentioned a compound found in broccoli, sulforaphane, which has been studied for its ability to activate the body's own internal defense mechanisms against inflammation. Not by fighting inflammation from the outside, the way a drug does, but by switching on the genes inside your cells that regulate inflammation in the first place. Your body already knows how to do this. Broccoli reminds it. I started eating broccoli 4 or 5 times a week, lightly steamed, never boiled to mush, with a drizzle of olive oil and a pinch of sea salt. Sometimes roasted until the edges went slightly dark and crisp, which is honestly how I prefer it. 3 months later, my inflammation markers had dropped to the lower end of the normal range. My doctor was pleased, but not as surprised as I might have hoped. She said the evidence on sulforaphane had been building for years. I said, then why didn't you mention it sooner? She didn't have a fully satisfying answer for that. I sleep through the night now. I have slept through the night almost without interruption for the better part of 20 years. I give the broccoli a significant share of the credit. The third vegetable is carrots, and this one may surprise you most because carrots are so ordinary, so unheroic, so completely unassuming that most people do not think of them as medicinal at all. They think of them as something you give a child to keep them quiet in the car. Here is what carrots have done for me. When I was in my late 70s, I started noticing something about my memory that alarmed me more than anything else on this list. It wasn't that I was forgetting names. I've never been especially good with names, even as a young woman, and I refuse to apologize for that now. It was something subtler. I would lose the thread of a conversation mid-sentence. I would read a paragraph in a book and find at the end of it that I had absorbed nothing. I would go to say something and find the word gone, not on the tip of my tongue, but simply absent, as though the shelf where it lived had been quietly cleared. These are the early signals that the brain's circulation is not what it should be. The brain is the most blood-hungry organ in the human body. It demands a continuous, generous, perfectly tuned supply of oxygenated blood. When that supply becomes compromised, when the blood vessels that serve the brain grow stiff or narrow or inefficient, the first things to go are the subtle ones, the quick retrieval, the sharp edge of language, the ability to hold several threads of thought at once. Carrots are rich in beta-carotene, potassium, and a family of antioxidants that support vascular health, specifically the health of the walls of your blood vessels. They help keep those walls supple and responsive. They support the blood pressure regulation that keeps your brain adequately fed. And there is now a meaningful body of research connecting higher dietary intake of beta-carotene with slower rates of cognitive decline in older adults. Research that was not available to my mother's generation, but that confirms what the oldest, sharpest people I have known throughout my life seem to understand instinctively. I eat carrots roasted with a little olive oil and cumin. I eat them raw mid-morning because the act of chewing something with resistance wakes up my digestion in a way that nothing else does as efficiently. I eat them in soups, in stews, grated into salads with a sharp vinegar dressing. The word-finding difficulty I described resolved over about 6 months. I cannot tell you with certainty that it was only the carrots. My whole approach to eating shifted during that period. But I can tell you that the carrots were a constant, and the cloudiness lifted, and today I am 100 years old, and I can hold my end of any conversation, follow any recipe, balance my own accounts, and write a letter that says precisely what I mean to say. My physician calls my cognitive health, in her words, inexplicably robust for any age. I find that slightly less flattering than she intends it, but I accept the compliment. Go ahead and give this a like if you're finding value in it, not for the algorithm. I barely know what that means and I refuse to pretend otherwise. But because if it helped you, it might help someone else who needs it today. One tap from you could be the reason a stranger starts eating their carrots. I think that's worth something. Now, I told you I would come back to something more important than the vegetables, and I meant it. Because here is the truth that I have never seen on any health channel, never read in any wellness article, never heard from any doctor in all my 100 years. The vegetables alone would not have been enough. I have known people who ate well and still faded. I have known people who exercised faithfully and still lost themselves. The body is more than chemistry. It is more than nutrients and compounds and anti-inflammatory pathways. The body is animated by something that does not show up on any blood panel. And that something, I'm going to call it the soul's intention, matters more than anything else. What I mean is this. Every morning, for as long as I can remember, before I get out of bed, I lie still for a few minutes and I say, quietly and sincerely, that I am grateful. Not for the large things only, for the light coming through the curtains, for the sound of the birds that nest in the oak tree at the corner of my yard, for the fact that I woke up at all, which is, let me assure you, something you do not take for granted at my age. I say it honestly. I do not perform it. I do not recite it like a formula. I mean it in the way you can only mean something when you have lived long enough to know how quickly it can be taken away. This practice, this daily renewal of faith that my life still has meaning and beauty, is not separate from my physical health. It is the root of it. The research is now quite clear, though I did not need research to tell me what I already felt in my bones. Chronic stress, chronic anxiety, chronic loneliness, chronic despair, they all accelerate the very inflammation I have been describing to you. They weaken the immune system. They disrupt sleep, which is when the brain clears out the debris that otherwise accumulates into cognitive decline. They constrict the very blood vessels that carry life through the body. And the antidote to all of it, the single most powerful prescription I have discovered in 100 years, is sincerity of spirit. The decision to live honestly, not bitterly, to tend to your own soul with the same care and patience that a gardener tends a garden, knowing that not everything blooms on your schedule, knowing that some seasons are for resting and some are for growing, knowing that the work of tending itself is the point, not just the harvest. I have been patient with myself in ways it took me many decades to learn. When I was younger, I was hard on myself for every failure, every loss, every year that did not go as I had planned. The hardness cost me. I could feel it, a kind of tightening, a drawing inward that was not peace, but armor. And armor is very heavy to carry for a long time. Patience with yourself, honesty with yourself, the willingness to sit with difficulty without either running from it or drowning in it. These are not soft ideas. These are survival skills. I have seen them keep people alive in ways that nothing in a pharmacy could replicate. And then there is the matter of other people. I want to speak to this directly because it is the thing I believe most deeply after 100 years of living. When I was 88 years old, a young woman moved in next door. She was in her 30s, raising 2 children on her own, working long hours, eating dinner standing at her kitchen counter most nights because she didn't have the time or energy to sit down. I could see it in how she moved, a particular kind of tiredness that is not about sleep, but about the feeling that nobody is watching out for you. I started leaving things on her porch. Nothing dramatic. A jar of soup, a loaf of cornbread, a note that said the bread was better warm, and to leave the dish on her steps when she was done, and not to bother knocking because I went to bed early. She knocked anyway. The first time, she stood at my door holding the empty dish, and she said, "I don't even know how to thank you." I said, "You just did. Come in." We had tea. We talked for an hour. She told me things she hadn't told anyone. I want to tell you what those evenings did for me physically, because I am not speaking in the abstract. After I began showing up for her in that small, consistent way, I slept better. My appetite improved. My mood was more stable. I woke up with what I can only describe as forward momentum, a feeling that the day was already organized around something that mattered, something outside my own body and its small complaints and grievances. The evidence on this is now substantial. though I did not need evidence to tell me what I already felt. People who feel genuinely useful to someone else live longer. People who give, not from obligation but from honest care, have lower rates of cognitive decline, lower rates of depression, lower rates of the kind of despair that in older adults can become physically as dangerous as any disease. When you give someone else a reason to feel less alone, you simultaneously give yourself one. And that is not a small thing. That is, I believe, one of the central mechanisms of a long life. It does not have to be grand. You do not have to organize a charity or build a foundation. You can make soup for a neighbor who is struggling. You can write a letter, by hand, with a stamp, to someone who is grieving. You can tell a younger person something true that took you decades to learn, and that they genuinely need to hear. You can sit beside someone who is frightened and simply be present, which is one of the greatest gifts one human being can offer another, and one of the most chronically underestimated. This is what I mean when I talk about feeding the soul alongside the body. The spinach feeds your nerves, the broccoli feeds your sleep, the carrots feed your mind, and the practice of showing up for other people, honestly, patiently, without expectation of return, feeds the deepest part of you. The part that decides, on some level we don't entirely understand, whether to keep going. I am 100 years old. I have no plans to stop. I eat my spinach and I think about Aunt Clara's hands, steady and sure until nearly the end. And I think about my own hands buttoning my blouse this morning, and I am grateful for the connection between those two things. I eat my broccoli, lightly steamed with olive oil, and I think about sleeping through the night tonight, about waking tomorrow and the morning being mine. I eat my carrots and I feel my mind, sharp, present, opinionated, mine, moving through the day with confidence. Every morning I am grateful, quietly, sincerely, honestly grateful. And I tend to my spirit the way I tend to my garden, with patience, with faith, with the understanding that nothing worth having arrives all at once, and that the daily, humble, unglamorous act of showing up and doing the work is the whole secret. If you are over 60 and you are frightened of losing your independence, of becoming a burden, of watching your body slowly betray you, I am not going to tell you not to be afraid. Fear is not the enemy. Fear is information. Fear is telling you that you care, that your life still matters to you, that you are not ready to let go of it. Use the fear. Let it move you toward the kitchen. Let it move you toward the neighbor who hasn't been seen in a few days. Let it move you toward honesty with yourself about what you are putting into your body and what you are putting into your soul. You are not too old. There is no such thing. I turned 100 years old in my own kitchen, standing at my own stove, cooking my own breakfast, and it tasted wonderful. If you made it all the way to the end of this, thank you, truly. Leave me a comment and tell me one thing you're going to change this week. One vegetable you'll add. One neighbor you'll check on. One morning you'll lie still for 5 minutes before getting up and mean it when you say you're grateful. I read every single comment. At 100 years old, I still have time for that. And so do you.